Yes.
I'm 17 years in Morgantown, and I've always heard, where are the independent bookstores? Why is this town happen? It's a
Yeah.
college town. And
Well, just a little before your arrival, I'd say there used to be at least one or two strong, but they were fading about the time you arrived. So. Hi,
Hi, I'm Andy.
I'm Mark.
Nice
Good to
meet you,
see
Mark.
you. I've seen you on stage, but not here.
Well, glad we get to share this space together today.
Yes.
It'll be great.
Me too. What do you teach?
anthropology.
Very cool.
I do a lot of work in research in Uruguay and South America, and I've been doing some in West Virginia more recently. Environmental justice issues mostly.
We could talk a lot about that.
Yeah. There's a lot to say.
I did a program with the Highlands Conservancy a few years ago, and it was a real delight. Times weren't quite as dark then as they are now. And your role on the panel? Yeah, I said your role.
Oh, my role in the panel. Speak a little bit more about anthropological understandings of the pandemic.
Oh, very cool. I look forward to that. And we'll all be jealous because we definitely look forward to hearing the long instrument.
The long, yes, 8 feet of tubing.
I played oboe, if you can believe,
Oh, great.
a million years ago. It's a long story. I actually, my instrument was a cheap clarinet that my family could afford. And how's this story go? Somehow, I got tapped when we weren't doing marching
Yep.
that they needed an oboe.
Right.
And I don't know how, but I got advanced far enough that I did learn how to make my own reeds.
There you go.
But of all instruments, I have a tin ear. Why put me on an oboe? I couldn't tell a sharp from a flat. I now know that it makes kind of a difference if you play the oboe,
Oh, yeah.
especially.
You know,
Or
okay,
a bassoon.
yeah, the clarinet or sound. Oh, you're sharp. Oh, okay. On the oboe, you're sharp. Okay. It's the blessing and the curse. You know, they say,
Well, yeah.
play the oboe, play the bassoon. You got scholarships in college. You're going to spend most of your life literally.
They don't tell you that. I know they don't. I know they don't.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to Lunch with Books. I'm Sean. I just wanted to announce that we have another program tomorrow at noon with Robin Yoakum, who's a local author of murder mysteries. And his book, what is it called? I've forgotten the title, but Robin is a very good writer. He'll be here tomorrow. And now I'm going to hand the microphone to, who's going to start? Okay.
Welcome, everyone. Before we say too many words, we're going to start today's hour together with music.
We, a pandemic poem. We bought masks, gloves, soaps, wipes, wore the masks, the gloves, hats, long sleeves. We studied and read and scrolled and listened and wept. We kept scrolling. We balled our fists, we cussed, we moaned, we schemed, we planned, we wept. We skipped that meeting, then this one, skipped church, skipped the race, skipped the concert, skipped the bar, did not skip the light. Fantastic. We forswore cash and raided the empty shelves. We did curbside. We ordered in, and we learned the names of the UPS man, the FedEx woman, the post person. We kept scrolling. We kept weeping. We watched the minutes, the hours, the days, the weeks, the months. We literally watched time fly and stop several times a day. Every day, we wept. We kept scrolling. We watched the news, studied maps, compared charts, listened to the hot potato of blame as it circled the nations, as we circled the wagons quarantined around our own little homes. We memorized symptoms, got swabbed, took vitamins, ate our greens, our oranges, took our temps, examined our shit. We wrote, we called, we Zoomed. We traded real for virtual. We traded people for memes. We traded money for memes. We traded thought for memes. We memed for memes. We kept scrolling. We forgot sometimes to weep. We shut the windows, closed the doors, locked the doors, pulled the shades. We grew long hair, canceled work, canceled play, quit shaving our faces, our legs, quit this world, and entered a new one. We walked the middle of the road, did not walk the close sidewalks, walked around the yard, walked upstairs and down, walked around the room. We sat, we scrolled until we wept once more. Then we didn't. We were lost at sea, lost in the mirror, lost on the screen, in the memes, in our very own homes with no breadcrumbs to find our way out or in. We watched the memes then dissolve. We watched our screens go blank. We watched the keys change to pebbles. We watched ourselves turn away from each other, turn and weep into our own so very, very clean hands.
So hello and welcome everyone to Lunch with Books, the first of a week-long series of events that the Wheeling Symphony is hosting this week as part of our Festival of Ideas, where each year we get together and examine a topic that culminates in our performance in the Capitol, but that from a liberal arts perspective we enjoy thought, discussion, and in this case, memory in a beautiful way. And this topic we know that we're discussing this week, the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, is one that probably has a lot of pain associated with it, a lot of loneliness associated with it. And that was why I thought it was best to start today with two different forms of art that perhaps touched your heart in a way that allowed you to sink back into the style of thinking, retrospective, that we're going to embark upon this week. Because wouldn't it be a shame if after 5 years, what we learned with COVID and what that was, that we didn't look back and think about that time and process that time. And one of the things that I'm proudest about our organization is that we are not just a music performing organization. We are a convener of liberal arts thinking in Wheeling and up and down the river. And today kicks off something that I hope will feel meaningful to you, meaningful to our community, and perhaps give us a chance to heal from something that I think many of us have not even perhaps started to heal from. And so it's under that umbrella that I would like to start by introducing the people that are going to contribute to our conversation today, both through our discussions and through art. And so I've got a microphone here for the panelists, and if we just kindly pass this down, we'll start. Welcome, Dee. Please let the audience know a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Dee Nazaro. I'm a psychologist in Wheeling, West Virginia. My office is right on 14th Street. and I work with adults, and I've had a lot of interaction with individuals that have suffered as a result of the pandemic, whether by contracting COVID or having increased anxiety, depression for related reasons. So it's a pleasure for me to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan.
Hi, my name is Daniel Renfrew. I'm an anthropologist by training, and I teach anthropology and do research at the West Virginia University, where I also chair the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. I do most of my research on environmental justice and health issues, so I've studied broadly environmental questions and issues abroad in Uruguay, which is the country of my birth as well, and where I do a lot of research, and in West Virginia as well. So again, yes, pleasure to be here. Those openings, two pieces were beautiful, so I really appreciate it.
What a pleasure. As a poet, don't get to sit next to an anthropologist every day, Daniel. So this is a treat for me as well. My name is Mark Harshman, and the library is one of my beloved second homes, and the symphony one of my spiritual nurturers. So it's a real pleasure. I'm the Poet Laureate of West Virginia. I was appointed in 2012. I have a new book out from WVU Press called Dispatch from the Mountain State, which curiously, interestingly, is the second poem that I'll share with you today, and we'll say more about that later. So thank you.
Thank you. Gail.
Thank you. First and foremost, I play flute and piccolo in the Wheeling Symphony, and am delighted to be assisting John in working with this Festival of Ideas this week. I think it will be very enlightening to all of us. I'm the Director of Foundations and Government Relations with the Wheeling Symphony, as well as orchestra librarian. So I write grants, I work with the legislature, advocacy, and I take care of the music that is on the stands and being distributed to the musicians.
Thank you, Gail. We couldn't do it without you. My name is Andy Sledge. I play principal bassoon with the Wheeling Symphony. It's such a joy to come out here. I always have such a wonderful artistic and human time with the Wheeling Symphony. I am based in Morgantown. I teach bassoon and music theory at West Virginia University, and I am looking forward to continuing to participate on this panel today.
Thank you, Andy. And I think we could acknowledge Mark and Andy one more time for their beautiful contributions at the beginning. I want to draw our attention just to a couple of special acknowledgments. First of all, Gail is being kind when she says that she's assisting me this week. Gail is the brainchild behind the Festival Ideas. She secures and provides some of the funding for the events, and she has worked tirelessly to bring everyone here together. We'll acknowledge Gail. Thank you so much. I also want to thank our staff members, Laura and Sadie, who are contributing so much, not only to this week, but to the Symphony's health in general. And then a big welcome to Wheeling and to West Virginia to our brand new Executive Director, Mark Zyla. Mark. We're so glad that you're here. And I hope that if you haven't already, after our session, you'll have a chance to go and shake Mark's hand and introduce yourself, because there are so many of our most stalwart supporters of the Symphony in this room here. So as we get started in earnest with our programming today, we might ask, why did we choose this program at this time? This is something that I wanted to embark upon as a community a few years ago, but it felt too soon. Also, as Andy was playing, and then Mark was giving his poetry reading, I was thinking a lot about the subject of home. In music, we know, even if we are completely uneducated about why, what home is. It's the tonic, it's the root, it's the first scale degree of whatever piece we're playing. And someone like Bach knows deeply what both the highly professional musician who's interpreting the music is feeling, and also the amateur audience member. And Bach, as well as every composer, plays with this idea of giving us something that we think is going to happen, and then whether that expectation is confirmed or thwarted, we feel an emotion. Sometimes the music goes right where we think it's going to go, and other times a left turn is necessary. But at the end of the piece, didn't everyone in this room know that Andy was finished? And that's part of what home gives us. It is the beginning and the end of a journey. And why was perhaps COVID so affecting for all of us? Well, the answer to that was, for me, found in Mark's poem, where he used the word home many times. Home was oddly where the journey was taking place for all of us. And because of that, we didn't know when it was going to end, because we were already in the place we go to for that comfort. So to have our solace, have our peace, have our comfort be taken away from us in the place that marks for us safety, return, home, I think that is the fundamental shift for us in a time of crisis. And it only happens about every 100 years, right? So may we never experience it again. But let's learn the lessons. Let's play the music. Let's write the poetry so that the next generation, because it will happen again, has the benefit of our experience. And I think that's a vital part of what we do as a community here, is learn from periods of struggle. And we've had them in Wheeling a lot recently. I mean, see the flood that just happened this past summer, right? Things out of our control that affect us and our homes. So why don't we put ourselves in that space and hear from the people that can describe for us the scientific and sociological perspectives about why these things affect us so deeply. So I'm going to turn the microphone now over to Daniel, and why don't we hear from you about the things that you observed during this period? Are you going to stand at the podium? That's fine.
Thank you, John. So I'm just going to speak some remarks from the perspective of anthropology and some of the work that anthropologists have done during and in the aftermath of the pandemic. So in the aftermath of a crisis or disaster like the COVID-19 global pandemic, anthropologists have examined and asked questions about the pandemic's origins, its profound effects on individuals, societies, and cultures, the social and political responses to it, the everyday experiences and cultural meanings attached to it, and the legacies it leaves behind. So it's a really multifaceted, holistic kind of perspective and look. Broadly, we ask, what does a pandemic reveal about our societies, our social orders and worlds, and how does it remake these in turn? Framed at a deeper, maybe more philosophical level, what does the COVID-19 pandemic tell us about what it means to be human? Crises, like the COVID-19 pandemic, are deeply revelatory of society's foundational elements. Anthropologists and others refer to these as the structural dimensions of a society, its core building blocks, its social arrangements, social infrastructures, and power relations. What we have found in examining disasters and crises of all types, whether infectious, ecological, political, or industrial in origin, is that social vulnerability and risk are unevenly expressed. A given society's core inequities and patterns of vulnerability will be reflected, but also usually deepened through a crisis. In other words, people suffer disasters and pandemics differentially, and the legacies of these disasters continue to unfold through time. Disasters are not a static event, they're an event that plays across time, with a past, a present, and a future. For COVID-19, as most of us are aware, the elderly, the disabled, the immunocompromised were most vulnerable to serious illness and death. But differential risk and harm also extended to the poor and to racial and ethnic minorities, many of whom had inadequate access to decent health care, or who lived in crowded urban areas with little recourse to socially distance, or who had to work in frontline professions and could not afford to or were not allowed to isolate, or those whose bodies' immune systems were compromised by inadequate nutrition or by living in areas saturated by toxic air and water or other forms of industrial pollution. It's okay. These latter individuals succumbed to what the late, great medical anthropologist, one of my favorites, Paul Farmer, referred to as structural violence, or how broader systems and decisions made from afar become embedded and embodied in individuals' lives in the forms of violence, illness, or harm. So anthropologists show us that one person's story and experience of illness, no matter how totalizing and sometimes world-shattering it can be, also reflects something more collective and much deeper. Anthropologists seek to channel and tell these stories, and in doing so, to reveal deeper truths about our social worlds and about the nature and mechanisms of power. And I'll just as an aside, it's not just anthropologists, of course, I'm drawing from my expertise in anthropology, but art plays a fundamental role in this and other social sciences as well. In the United States, to give some examples, blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans suffered higher rates of illness and death from COVID-19 than whites. And this should be obvious, it's not about biology, it's not about genes, but it's about different lived experiences and about structural violence that produce different outcomes. For blacks, the George Floyd murder illuminated the twinned epidemic, as activists and academics called it, of police violence. So the epidemic of COVID and the epidemic of police violence together against minority communities. While many people longed for a return to pre-COVID normal, as was often said during the crisis, George Floyd reminded us that normal isn't always safe or best for everyone, and that we still have a lot of work to do. We can trace similar stories within different contexts from around the world. In Eastern Europe, for instance, the Roma, colloquially long known as the Gypsies, right? Communities suffered harassment and discrimination as dominant ethnicities reproduced old tropes of Roma so-called filth and deviance. The Dalit, or the untouchable caste of India, Latin American indigenous peoples who make up, for instance, in Andean countries, majority minorities, right? Most of the people, but in a minority political status, suffered similar fates. These examples reflect the power of cross-cultural analysis and comparison, the hallmark of anthropology, to illuminate the specific mechanisms of structural violence and ultimately how our societies and social hierarchies are socially constructed and arbitrary in nature, and that, in theory at least, they can be changed. I think that's one of the big lessons of the pandemic. And then just as, if I have like a minute, just as a personal aside, as an educator, in 2020, I had the misfortune of, in a lot of ways, we all did various ways, right? But I chose to take my first sabbatical in the spring semester of 2020. So it was January through May. And it was going well for the first 2 months. But then in March, I decided to do research. I was doing a new project in Uruguay. I'd published a book previously on a different project, and I was embarking on a new project. And I was planning a trip, just a short 3-week trip to Uruguay to engage in ethnographic research there. And I took my then 9-year-old daughter with me. My parents were there living. They spent half the year there, half the year in the United States. And so we had a place to stay and someone to care for my daughter while I did research and all that. We made about 8 days before the first case of COVID-19 was declared in Uruguay, and they started the contact tracing and lockdown, and we decided we needed to get out of there and get back. My wife was waiting for us, very anxious, as you can imagine, and we ended up getting on the second to last flight home to the United States before flights were shut down for about 6 months. My parents, who were supposed to go back in April, ended up spending another year plus in Uruguay. And at the time, well, it was anguishing to say goodbye to them. We didn't know, so much uncertainty in March of 2020. Ultimately, I think it was a good decision for them to stay, and I can get into that later if someone wants to talk about it, but it speaks to some structural conditions of the healthcare system, but also the social networks and kin networks and cultural support that they had there. And Uruguay was doing great with the pandemic, really contained until it wasn't. And then the vaccine rollout was slow to get there because it's a country of the so-called global south, right? And it wasn't a priority in the world scale. So things turned really bad for a while. My parents survived it, thankfully. We did lose others as well, though. And then I came back. And then I taught I wasn't teaching that semester because I was on sabbatical. That was the positive for me. But then in the fall, WVU decided to go all online and gave us the option of teaching synchronously or asynchronously, meaning teaching live versus teaching, you post things and people do work on their own. I decided, and my wife decided, she also teaches anthropology, to teach live, to teach synchronously. And at the time, we were thinking it's the most effective way to deliver education to our students, but also we quickly learned this was more than just about transmitting anthropological knowledge, having our students learn the facts so they can go on to careers in anthropology or other fields, but it was about a practice and ethics of care. Our students needed us, Our students needed each other. Our students needed support. And it was very challenging. Those early days, I called it teaching into the void, because I teach on Zoom, and a lot of times they wouldn't have their cameras on, so I was teaching to the darkness, and I felt like a TV late night host or something like that with no audience. And I was trying, but we felt it was really important. And so obviously there's a lot that could be said about the impacts of COVID on the education system and on teaching, but we saw a lot of the legacies of that we're still in some ways dealing with today, because now we have students who went through COVID in high school. My own daughter went through COVID in 5th grade and didn't go to school in 5th grade, right? We did online, right? So anyway, there's a lot of lasting impacts and legacies that we can still unpack along those lines, but thank you for now.
So what a beautiful broad strokes view of societal impact, the bigger questions that we face as a community when we wrestle with something atypical like this. And you talked about the impact on educators and on the people that you are educating. And as you can see, if you look up here, not too many of us were students during the pandemic time, but one of us was. And so I'm going to turn it back to Andy, who's going to talk a little bit about what it was like to be an artist and a student during this difficult time.
Sure, yeah. I have a handful of notes scribbled out, but so if we need to move, just let me know. I could probably yap for too long about this. But so I was finishing my master's in bassoon at the Yale School of Music, transitioning into my doctorate right around the spring 2020 semester. So I remember we were supposed to go on this Yale Philharmonia East Coast tour, hit Boston, Baltimore, New York, and we got our per diem cards for the trip. It was about to be spring break. That was when we were going to have this big tour going on. And then that day, I remember sitting in the student lounge when we get the email, we will not be going on this tour. Classes probably won't be happening in New Haven after spring break. Good luck. And of course, amidst all the scramble of all of these, we were students being students, folks saying, quick before the orchestra manager can call, cash that per diem card. They can't take it back if it's empty. But then we all ended up heading back to, some folks it was dorms, some folks their dorms closed. They had to move back wherever their permanent home was. I was staying in my apartment in Connecticut. I guess if I had to put it in one word, what I was experiencing at that time was a gaining of perspective through all of this tragedy, chaos, struggle. We moved to Zoom everything, and so I don't know if you know this, but musicians learn to be artists by playing with each other. You learn how to be a better artist by playing for a teacher who is 5 feet away from you. On the bassoon and on the oboe, oftentimes you learn how to make reeds by playing a little bit. Your teacher saying, give me that reed. Are you sick right now? They play on it. They say, I would do this to this reed. Let me show you. Okay, now you try it. This was it is still an integral part of education for especially music grad students. Like when you are working on a master's in performance, you're training to be an academic on some level, you're training to be an artist, and you're also trained to be a professional. I remember my first professional work after 2 years sitting on the New Haven Symphony sublist, and finally getting a call for late March 2020. It would be another 2 years before I would get a call to play music for money. So that transition was challenging. It was hard to find a way to grow as an academic, as a professional, as an artist when you're sitting in your little apartment, making sure your microphone isn't too close and not too far away so your teacher can get somewhat of a sense of what's going on as you play. The other side of that perspective came about when, after the murder of George Floyd, as a racial reckoning was sweeping the nation, that swept, I think, just about every aspect of life if you sat with it long enough, and certainly it swept through the arts. And I was one of several folks who was seeing folks saying, well, hey, we've been neglecting black composers. We've been neglecting indigenous composers. We've been neglecting women composers, gender nonconforming, gender minority composers. And so, rightfully so, and in an overdue way, there was this push to start programming more music by the term you'll often hear, these historically marginalized composers, whether they are from the 18th century or folks that are still alive and writing today. I want to, transition into a performance by reflecting on not only do you get this perspective of, well, there's so much music out there that is great music by someone who just happened to not be part of the hegemonic majority. It wasn't 2020 that, lit that spark and said, to everyone, hey, by the way, these composers have existed. We could see there have been folks doing that work for years, decades, centuries, long before a lot of us woke up to it. So I'm going to play a movement or two, maybe I'll do two movements of a piece by Adolphus Hailstork, an African-American composer. He wrote this piece called Bassoon Set in 2003, well before 2020. And it's just a short, very joyful, playful work. This piece was first professionally recorded in 2008 by the black bassoonist Lacolian Washington. Hailstork's work, Washington's work, was not gone unnoticed, between 2003 or 2008 and today, but I find in considering the role of art in my life, the role of art in society, the role of my art in society, I want to focus not only on, yes, uplifting voices who have not had a chance to be heard, but also recognizing that the work I'm doing is standing on the shoulders of several people who have been doing that work from even, well before any of us were alive. So I'll play two movements here of Adolphus Hailstork's Bassoon Set.
You can imagine how happy we are that Andy is one of the newest members of the Wheeling Symphony, and it was a great pleasure last year to hand him his tenure letter as we welcome you warmly, fully into the Wheeling Symphony Orchestra. Now, during COVID, you are not yet part of the ensemble, but Gail, you were and have been for a long time. And so this was probably something unprecedented, and you probably don't see too many things for the first time around the WSO. What was it like for you as a member of the ensemble and as a member of the staff to help us navigate through this time of unprecedented change?
First of all, it was devastating to our orchestra, and you can understand that it was devastating not only because, as Andy said, we had studied music our lives. It was our life, and if we are orchestral musicians, that's what we want to do. Orchestral musicians means playing with each other. We are used to playing on the stage with 70 other people, and now we were faced with what happens. We can't do it anymore. How long will this last? On March the 12th, 2020, we had a dress rehearsal, Beethoven 7th Symphony. And the rehearsal was almost over, but a little crowd of people came from the symphony office to say that we were in lockdown. The state was in lockdown, that the concert had been canceled, just as Andy said. There was nothing for us to do. So I think it was mostly shock for everyone. Trying to think ahead, fear set in. What about our families? What about our livelihood? Our orchestra musicians receive payment for what they're doing on the stage. If this meant nothing for many, many, many months, then what will we do? One of our musicians actually stocked shelves in a grocery store to help pay for the support for his family. Some musicians left the profession and found other work, studied during this time and found other work. So we were unhappy for ourselves because we couldn't be with our symphony family, but we also knew that, as Mark said and as Daniel said, we are here for our community. We play for our community. We know that there were people who needed to hear music. They needed hope. And we knew that we could provide that hope through the emotion that we had in our music. John gave us that hope, and I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later with finding his creativity and persistence that we will provide something for our community and we will provide something for our musicians. As far as the office is concerned, just let me say, we were at home, as everyone was at home, and we were doing lots of things that Mark was talking about, except that we were working, and there were grants available, many federal grants available, many other grants available, because in the artist community, we knew, and some other people knew, that we needed something to keep us going and to keep our artists going. We didn't want everybody to leave the profession. So I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, and it was a good time. There were children out playing in the neighbor's yard, and socially distanced, of course. And I had a good time, and I think we indeed did we got some really good grants, and office worked with us. We had Zoom meetings 3 times a day, so we kept in touch with each other. We knew what was going on, and we knew where we were headed. We knew more about where we were headed when John, in his first year with us, said, we have to have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, and work our way through these guidelines and see what we can do. And I think we're going to talk about that a little later.
Yes, we will, certainly. And you mentioned that we do a lot of preparation in our own practice rooms, our own offices, but when our art manifests, it's in public because you, our audience, are an integral part in not only the energy cycle in a concert hall, but in the reception of the art, and we want to contextualize that for you as much as possible, which is part of what we're doing here. Now, Mark, I turn to you because your art is different. You don't necessarily have a participatory element with others or with your audience as you're creating. In fact, perhaps poetry and authorship is one of the things that was maybe least affected in a structural sense by the pandemic, but I'm sure that the types of things you felt and the types of things you're considering about as topics for your approach, those probably felt completely new and necessary. Would you mind walking us through your experience?
Happy to do so. I went through at least part of the darkness that I read about in that first poem, and it was indeed a dark time. And it was a time of unsatisfactory grieving, if you can wrap your head around that. I lost 3 close members of my family and friends during this time, none to COVID, but I did not feel as if during that time I was able to properly honor the grief that I would have honored in the previous time, and that was real. There were a lot of small griefs, the loss of a favorite bookstore, the loss of restaurants, the loss of my favorite jazz venue in Manhattan. The Jazz Standard went under, and the Mingus Big Band was no longer there for me to hear. But otherwise, as John intimated, my work went on. My work is always done in quiet and solitude, and so that perhaps continued with a better focus. I was able to bring out 2 full-length collections and 2 chapbooks, and even helped edit a full-length collection of the poems of the late Timothy Russell. So the work got done. The most obvious change in this period was moving to Zoom. I was very grateful for that. It enabled certain things to continue, like the Poetry Out Loud competition for high school students in West Virginia, of which I've been a large part for many, many years. But it was also profoundly unsatisfying. My audience, when I give a reading or a talk, is usually a fairly small and intimate one, and I feed, forgive me if using that word, but I feed off the energy I see in the faces of those to whom I'm speaking and reading, and that does not, I don't get that energy off of a Zoom meeting. But as I say, it was also, I was grateful to have it, like I say, that things could continue. And finally, I just say that during the period of COVID, the arts remained a profound nurture to me, arts of all kinds. And I am forever giving thanks for the presence of West Virginia Public Broadcasting in my life, and those things continued. And well, thank you. It's always good to be here for the symphony. Oh, and I'm going to read a poem. Yes. In September of 2020, I got a phone call from the New York Times. Believe me, I do not usually get phone calls from the New York Times, but they were asking all the poet laureates of states to reflect upon what was going on in their state. And didn't mean to write a poem necessarily. It could be prose, but I responded with this poem, which is also the title of my latest book from WVU. And it also reflects a little bit upon some of what Andy was saying a minute ago about how we, and Daniel also referenced this, the profound structural violence, I believe is the word you use, that's apparent in the world. Anyway, here we go. Dispatch from the Mountain State. Somewhere, someone's listening to trees talk in a language like song, a song that's been going on longer than time, maybe. Here, we take the maybe with the bad and the certain, along with everything else. Nothing goes to waste in the heart of Appalachia. Elsewhere, behind a curtain, an old man watches his neighbor trudge through snow to bring a shovel and soup. Elsewhere, a child's racing the sidewalk home to a dinner where a grandmother sits in state, in grace. And somewhere, someone's sleeping rough on a cold night, and someone knows how to find this man, how to find a roof, blankets, food, hope. You see, we're still holding on here just enough, despite all we're doing wrong, holding on enough to give not only this man, but ourselves enough for which to be thankful. Even this, these little gestures that can rebirth a nation, reconcile not only colors like black and white, like blue and red, but reconcile us one to the other. Thank you.
I think that's a perfect transition to our next topic, because we've talked about this at a societal level, we've talked about it at an artistic level, and now you're bringing it to the individual level in a different way. And Dee, I'd love to welcome you into the conversation and to ask you, what are the experiences you've had in your professional work that you've seen evolve since the outbreak of the COVID pandemic?
Good morning. First, I'd like to talk about the psychological impacts of COVID, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I experienced it in my office. COVID, as we all know, led to unprecedented hazards in mental health globally. There was high rates reported in many countries all over the world, the United States, Italy, Spain, China, and there was a significant increase in anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, psychological distress, and stress. And the range of the increase in reporting in these symptoms was between 6 and 82%. That's quite an increase. And this was affected by the number of lockdown days, student status, unemployment, having to go to work, knowing someone that contracted COVID. There were higher levels of anxiety, depression, PTSD, and stress with individuals who had lower levels of education, poor self-reported health, high loneliness, quarantine status, a history of mental health and medical problems, chronic illness, because these individuals had compromised immunity, so that raised their stress level. And people that had frequent exposure to social media, the news regarding COVID. Another interesting fact is individuals less than 40 years old, they had higher levels of anxiety, stress, and trauma, especially women who provided financial and emotional support to children and the elderly. There was a lot of job loss and unpredictability caused by COVID, and this was stressful to people. And a lot of women were impacted in this regard too, because they worked in the healthcare field, they worked in the service and retail industries. And we talked about student stress. There was a lot of stress among students for different reasons. Schools were closed, social events were canceled, exams were postponed. So there was just, in general, a lot of uncertainty. There were some protective factors, too, that I think are important to note. When people received timely, accurate, updated information about COVID from the medical authorities, that was a protective factor. People that wore their mask, washed their hands frequently, and had less contact with people, that was a protective factor. People with positive coping styles, secure attachment styles, people that had good social support and were able to rest during the pandemic. This was a protective factor. It's important to note, especially in my line of work, because I do a lot of work in addictions, there is an increased alcohol use among people that were 40 and older that suffered from anxiety and depression. Why did this happen? People experienced a decreased level of control in their life. And a lot of times people tend to turn to unhealthy things, whether it's drugs, alcohol, become addictive to social media. There was a lot of misinformation out there. People didn't know what to believe. And people's lives were dramatically changed. And some people had difficulty adjusting to this reorganization of their daily life. And so they got more depressed, anxious. A lot of people let go of their physical activity routines. And we all know how important physical activity is to our overall health. Physical activity has been shown by research that it can buffer the negative impact of depression and anxiety. I saw a lot of real-life examples in my office. People were traumatized, especially in the healthcare field. You saw people dying every day. People couldn't be with their loved ones when they died. My mom died during COVID, not from COVID. And fortunately, my dad had the presence of mind to take her home, or we would have been separated from her at the time of her death, which I couldn't fathom. People a lot of times didn't realize till after the fact how COVID had affected them. A lot of people spoke about it later, how they didn't realize how they isolated so much more, their decreased depression, anxiety, how they stopped their normal lives. And people struggled to get back, even after COVID, into their normal lives. People struggled to still combat depression and anxiety and the stress that they experienced. And people didn't just get right back into their daily routines. And then you had the issue of long COVID. I have patients that maintain they still suffer from long COVID. And how did long COVID affect people? It affected people's memory a lot, the long COVID. It affected their sleep. It affected, their level of depression and anxiety. So working in the trenches, which is what I always like to say I do, and I love it, because you're with real people dealing with real problems. And I consider it a privilege when people share what's really going on in their lives and their emotions, and they don't talk just at the surface level. I don't take that lightly. And so if you can even make someone look at a situation with a little more hope, I think that's a gift. And so I'm giving gifts every day from the individuals I work with, and you like to try to give a little bit of that back. And I think that's the biggest thing I took from this was instilling hope in yourself and others, and just living it, and I kept doing the things that always worked for me, whether it was physical health. Not a lot of things changed because I didn't want it to change. Sure, you couldn't see family and friends as much, but other aspects of your life, I continued to challenge myself and encourage my clients to challenge themselves and to find healthy coping skills. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me today.
Thank you, Dee. And so, Daniel, that brings us to you for one last set of comments about the health ramifications and the other types of things you're seeing from a sociological perspective.
Thank you. So I began my remarks about talking about how a crisis, in this case a pandemic, can reveal and reproduce and deepen the most naked forms of discrimination and structural violence. But a crisis, crises are highly destructive in that sense, but they're also generative. They're generative of positive things, like Dee was and Mark were alluding to as well, that are good stories to tell. So even while crises generate moral imperatives and demand decisive action, it's never constituted by a single story. The differential risk and harm of structural violence is not, thankfully, the end of the only story of COVID. So pandemics and crises more broadly can generate and reproduce extraordinary things like solidarity, hope, resilience, and an ethic of care. These beautiful impulses also reflect what it means to be human. COVID provoked a fundamental rethinking of our relations. The most widely accepted theory of the origins of COVID-19 traces it to a zoonotic virus in Asia. The jumping of pathogens from animals to humans has become increasingly common in the wake of overdevelopment, biodiversity loss, and habitat destruction. COVID-19 invites us to rethink our relationship with the non-human world and to imagine a more harmonious, less destructive path. The sudden and dramatic drop in industrial emissions and greenhouse gases in the wake of the COVID lockdowns invited us to imagine the possibility of solutions to an ecological crisis that we had been told by so many was impossible to achieve. COVID also generated so many stories and images, I'm sure you've seen these, of wildlife taking over our cities, produced a quiet in the skies not experienced in many years. People found in ecological spaces an escape from the threat of contagion, and in the process, discovered or rediscovered nature's beauty and its ability to heal. COVID provoked a rethinking of our relations to others, to our technologies, as Mark was reading, to our elders, our children, our kin, our friends, our neighbors, and even strangers. We were all in it, whatever it was, in something together in ways that we had never experienced, or few had never experienced. The idea of first responder, first made into hero status in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks on 9/11, gained renewed appreciation and extended to frontline workers, those in the trenches, as you were saying, Dee, in the wake of COVID. We rethought the goals of work and the priorities of work-life balance. We relearned food-making crafts, and a shared meal became transcendent. Around the world and at home, people gifted food to others individually or through communal soup kitchens and other forms of collective giving, providing care to those in need and creating community in one of the most fundamental and ancient ways known to humanity. And the arts, right, as we've been discussing today, and symphonies performed on rooftops in New York City, and violinists on balconies in Rome, and artists holding workshops and classes on Zoom, as imperfect as it was. My daughter went to Mo Willems, if you're familiar with the Elephant and Piggy, wonderful series, and he held a series of art workshops on Zoom. She learned the guitar for the first time and then continued afterwards. She started her own musical journey that way. So through COVID, we experienced so much suffering and so much loss, but we also learned or relearned an ethics of care, the imperative to care for and protect each other's health fundamentally, but also care for our relations, for the mind, for the natural world, and ultimately for the soul. Thank you.
So, just so you know, I know that we are at 1 o'clock, and if anybody departs from this room, there will be no hard feelings at all. But we do have one more musical performance that I want to make sure that we get to, and kind of a closing pitch from me. If you are able, please check out the remainder of the events that are taking part this week as part of Festival of Ideas, including our concert on Saturday. And please note that it's a matinee this week, not at our normal time, 2 p.m. This is something that we've experimented with over the last couple of years and found that for especially families, a lot of good response to a 2 p.m. start time on a weekend. So we're hoping lots of young people will be in the concert hall with us as well. So thank you for being with us here today, and please welcome for the final aspect of today's time together, one last performance from Andy. This is the Telemann Flute Fantasia number 7. to everyone on our panel, and thank you to you all for being here today. That concludes our session, and I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have. I'll come out and social.